many of us get, when we get into fitness, we have particular goals that trump all other goals, things that are more important to us than other things. And so you'll have some guys who'll be like, I want to hit a certain number in my bench press, or I want to hit a certain number in my squat or my deadlift, or all three you want to bring up, right? Which would be more ideal, right? Or you're like, I want to run this certain race at a certain time, right? Or I want to do like these calisthenics tricks, right? I want to be able to do 20 pull-ups in a row. I want to be able to do a muscle up. I want to be able to do the human flag or something like that, right? And there's nothing wrong with these goals. However, hey guys, Aaron Kupitz, personal trainer, Functional Aesthetics EC, helping average guys perform better inside and outside the gym. Today we're going to be talking all about the muscle up. So muscle ups have, and calisthenics in general, or body weight training, or strength and conditioning training, has gained a lot of popularity in the past few years, and I am no exception. So when I was in junior high, I believe it was, I watched a 1950s movie with, it was called The Flame and the Arrow. So it was a medieval setting, and the main actor, the leading man in the movie, Burt Lancaster, had been a circus performer prior to getting into acting. And so in a lot of his movies, he would incorporate different acrobatic stunts. And one of the things that I saw him do in this particular movie was he was in the one scene they were in, him and his buddy were in a barn, right? And they were having a conversation or whatever, and they were pacing around in the barn, and Burt Lancaster decided that he wanted to go up into the haymow. But instead of taking the ladder to get up there, he just jumped up, grabbed the floorboards, and then popped himself up without swinging his legs up or anything like that. And I just thought that was amazing, and so ever since then, I've wanted to do a muscle up. So for the past 5 years since I've started my fitness business, I've been quite busy. For the first couple of years, I was working a day job and then also working in the evenings, and then I was also trying to do these YouTube videos as well. And so going down to a park or something to try to train some of these calisthenics moves was oftentimes a little bit of a stretch. Sometimes I would do it if I was going out for a run or something. I'd just run down to the park, do some stuff. But I also wanted to do my free weight training, and so it wasn't a big enough of a priority to justify the time spent going to a park. Furthermore, some of the exercises that I want to do, in addition to doing a muscle up, is I wanted to learn how to do the human flag. Now, they didn't have any of the proper equipment at these parks that are around my house or in the vicinity of where I live to be able to train the progressions of doing the human flag. So that was another thing. So what I decided I wanted to do was to build a pull-up bar in my backyard, because as you see I have a pull-up bar here, but I obviously can't train to do a muscle up doing on that because my head would go through the ceiling if I did. So I needed something that I could have plenty of headroom, plenty of space to swing my body back and forth as well, because I have to bend my knees when I do this one. So also not very conducive to doing a muscle up unless you're doing a very strict one, which is a more advanced version of a muscle up, and you need a lot more strength than you do to just do an ordinary muscle up. So that's what I did. I was going to build up this pull bar and then also have a set of stall bars that I would build out on the side of the pull-up bar as well to help me practice for my muscle or for my human flag exercise. So took me a couple of years, but I finally got around to getting that set up, okay? And so what I had done in my research of how to do a muscle up is to see that, okay, roughly, depending on who you ask, between 10 to 20 consecutive pull-ups in a row and about the same amount of dips is what you need as a prerequisite before you start to train to do the muscle up. So I went and I found a program by a popular calisthenics athlete on YouTube to help progress to doing 20 pull-ups in a row. And this is a classic example of how it's important not to just follow cookie cutter sort of workouts. They may or may not work, but there's a lot of different variables, which I'm going to be getting later on into the video, that can affect how well you're able to progress with it. Because you would think that, hey, if I just went out and practiced doing pull-ups every day or a couple of times a week, that eventually I'd just be able to do a lot more pull-ups, right? But it's not quite that simple. So for this program, it started out with something like doing I don't know, it was like 6 sets of 3 pull-ups or something, right? And then the next week it would progress to doing like 4 or 5 sets of 5 pull-ups, or it was like 4 pull-ups or something. So progressively, a little less sets, more repetitions, because the goal is to increase the amount of pull-ups that you can do in a single set. And so on paper, theoretically, it sounded good. The problem is that we all have different environments. Also, your nutrition is going to play a huge role into that. I'm going to get into this further on in the video. And then the other thing is that it doesn't take into account either that you have to have some periodization in there as well, okay? So this is what happened for me. The first week I was able to do, and so I'm just going to give you the numbers for Monday of the first 3 weeks, because this is supposed to be a 6-week training program. So on Monday, I did 25 total pull-ups. Not consecutively, but just over the course of the day, anywhere between 3 to 5 repetitions per set. And I did a total of 20 of the 25 pull-ups for Monday. Okay? Well, the following week, I was able to get a total of 31 pull-ups in. Good, right? So now my total volume is increasing. I'm getting more pull-ups in, and so things are going great, right? Well, the next week, obviously I'm starting to get a lot of calluses in my hands. Even some of them are starting to rip off a little bit from all this hanging on the bar. And I'm training only 3 days a week, right? So it's not like I'm training every single day trying to max out my pull-ups. And so this shouldn't be a problem. But the issue is, prior to getting into this, I never really had a routine for my pull-ups. I basically do pull-ups when I felt like doing them, and I'd actually do a lot more biceps curls than I would do pull-ups, right? And so usually the most pull-ups I'd ever do in a set is like 3 or 4 pull-ups, right? And I wouldn't do a whole lot of sets. I'd just do it, if it felt good and I was feeling like doing it, right? And I focused a lot more on doing things like squats, deadlifts, bench presses, big compound movements, not a lot of the body weight stuff at all. But I knew that if I wanted to get to my goal, I'd have to start doing more of this, okay? So in the second week, like I said, I got up to 31 pull-ups total for the day. Now, in the third week, I could tell that, I was starting to get a little bit worn out, even though I was just training 3 days a week. But I had drastically increased my volume from basically maybe doing a set of pull-ups once a week to now doing multiple sets of pull-ups 3 days a week, okay? And so by the third week, now I'm down to 21 pull-ups on Monday, whereas I had been at 31 pull-ups the previous week, and when I had started out, I had been at 25. So it actually got worse than my starting point, simply just because I had put in too much volume too soon. And that's another issue that will often happen, is that we will get so excited about building more muscles, about getting in better shape, losing body fat, right? Or preparing for a run, a marathon, or whatever, and we don't realize that, as Arnold Schwarzenegger said, and I've said many times before on this channel, is that we train as hard as we can, but the body adapts at its own pace. So you have to allow that consistency over time, right? Yes, there are more ideal ways to train and less ideal ways to train. But at the end of the day, if you are not consistent, it doesn't matter how good your training program is. The most important thing in your program is to be consistent. And it's going to take a long period of time, and you also have to take in times where you're not training as much, where you're not pushing yourself, right? And this goes with fat loss as well. You can't always trying to lose weight. So if you have, let's say 30, 50 or more pounds of weight to lose, don't expect that you're going to be able to lose 2 pounds of weight every week until you hit your goal indefinitely and never hit a plateau, okay? So there has to be some times where you back off and kind of maintain, take a little bit of time in a strategic way, and then resume up your training again so that you're staying on point. And that's one of the hardest things to do, is to remain patient and keep your focus on the end goal for the long term, especially when that long-term goal is maybe a couple years out from where you currently are. All right, so let's get into some additional reasons why I believe that I ultimately that my results were not what I had hoped for. So number one was the thing that I really wasn't, my starting level of fitness really wasn't adequate for the goal that I was training for, right? So I'm going to continue to train to be able to do the muscle up, but as I will get on into later on in the video, I'm going to make sure that I maintain the rest of my routine as well, and I don't let it become lopsided towards muscle ups. Okay, so that was the first one, is basically I just wasn't ready. I was increasing the volume and the frequency of my training too much relative to what I was already doing. Okay, the second piece has to do with nutrition, has to do with diet, right? And so as I've talked about in some of my other videos, is that some people will be training for an aesthetic goal, right? i.e. they want to reduce their body fat percentage. Maybe they want to get down to the single digits, or they want to get down to like a 10% body fat. Now, if you're trying to go from like a 20% body fat and get down to 10 to 15% body fat, it's not going to probably affect your ability to train all that much, okay? However, if you are trying to go from 10 down to like, single digit body fat, then you are going to have to expect a little bit of a decrease in your performance output, whether that is your endurance or your strength, okay? And so for me, one of the things that I've struggled with throughout my whole entire adult life, and for the past 5, 6, 7 years, has actually been greatly improved, and I've been steadily improving it through various different means, functional medicine, fasting, different things like that, and different changes to my diet have very much helped. But the problem is that some of these changes to my diet, i.e. eating a lower carbohydrate, sometimes even bordering on ketogenic diet. So if I'm not doing a lot of running, for example, my diet day to day might be 75 to 80% from fat. The calories, the percentage of my diet might be 75 to 80% fat calories, okay? And then maybe only 10% or less of my calories coming from carbohydrates. Now, this is the reason that I started eating this way, had nothing to do with an aesthetic reason of trying to get leaner. It had more to do with the fact that I was dealing with a lot of what you call gut dysbiosis, where you have an imbalance of bad bacteria to good bacteria in your gut, and it causes wreaks all sorts of havoc in your body. One of the things is that these bad bacteria, they will give off different noxious gases, right? And these things can give you brain fog, right? And affect and create a lot of inflammation in the gut, and so you're just not functioning as ideally as possible. In fact, during my, the first 10 years of my adult life, it was extremely problematic. I could not even function as a normal human being, let alone as an athlete. And so I found that reducing the intake of grains, fruits, things like that, and increasing the levels of vegetables, more healthy fats, so like olive oil, coconut oil, avocados, some nuts and seeds if you soak them, and then also limited amounts of animal fats, especially like whole eggs and things like that. And so having a little bit higher fat intake, lower carbohydrate intake, helped me to clear up a lot of the brain fog issues that I would have, and it just allowed me to be able to function better in life in general. Now, was it optimal for my fitness training? So here's been my experience. Now, in the literature, what they will tell you is that a ketogenic diet, if you're doing like an ultra marathon, or you're doing low intensity steady state cardio for long periods of time, can perform on a par with a normal standard diet, right? However, at distances of a marathon or less, and especially strength training, your peak power output is going to suffer if you're on a low carbohydrate diet. So while it helped me to think good, and it helped me to just generally overall feel good, because I had other issues as well associated with some of the foods that I was eating, and so for me it was more important to be healthy than to be as jacked as possible, or to be the best runner or the best athlete that I could be. So that was part of the thing too. And then when I transitioned into my business, I further restricted some carbohydrates from what I had been doing when I had been doing manual labor jobs, because I didn't want to I was in excellent physical condition, and so made it very hard for me to sit for long periods of time. Because one of the things that happens is when you exercise very regularly, you are going to, and you are relatively lean, your insulin sensitivity is very high. And so you're going to have abundant amounts of energy, and it was very hard for me to sit for prolonged periods of time, which I needed to do when I was doing things like this, where I'm, writing, doing research, when I'm creating client programs, when I am writing content for my various different marketing things, when I'm editing videos like this. And that's one of the reasons also that I don't do this super high level production for my YouTube videos, just because it takes about 5 hours to create a super high quality video production for YouTube. Something that, as being a professional fitness business owner, and not just a YouTube person who doesn't have a team working for me, I just don't have the time to devote 5 hours to create these kind of productions for the YouTube video. So I just try to put in good information instead. Okay, so how does this relate to the muscle up? Well, when you're trying to do a high volume of pull-ups and stuff, and we know that carbohydrates are the primary source of fuel for high intensity exercise. Yes, you can make ATP from fatty acids, but the conversion process is much slower and less efficient than it is for carbohydrates. So, if your carbohydrate levels are low, if your glycogen levels tend to run pretty low normally, then it is going to make it harder to build up to doing higher amounts of volume of training. And that's one thing that I noticed, like if I'm doing bodybuilding training, right? If you're doing that high volume style of bodybuilding training, you also need to be eating more calories, and a higher percent of those calories coming from carbohydrates and fats, but preferably more from carbohydrates to facilitate the training that you're doing. Not only does it give you more energy, it's also going to increase the amount of glycogen in the muscles. It's going to fill the muscles out, give them more stretch, which will help to ultimately help you have more leverage when you're lifting as well. All right, so the next thing we can look at here is something called anthropometrics, or the relative ratio between the different segments of your body. So for example, do you have relatively long shins relative to your thighs, or are they pretty evenly spaced, right? On the other hand, do you have long thighs and relatively short shins? Because, for example, if you're doing a squat, that can affect things as well. Also, how long is your torso? And the same thing with the arms, right? Now, one way to determine what if you have long arms or short arms is to do the ratio between your body height and your arm length. And so for me, I'm 6'1", so 73 inches tall, and my arm span is 74 inches. So I'm just slightly on the long arm side, but not terribly so. Now, if you are somebody who has extra long arms, it is going to make things like doing pull-ups more difficult. Also, bench presses are going to be more difficult for you. Whereas doing deadlifts as somebody with long arms could be actually advantageous and helpful because you don't have to move the weight as far off the floor. Whereas when you're doing the pull-up, you have to move your weight farther on every rep, and that additional effort that you have to expend to move your body a couple more inches or so on every single rep compounds over the course of the rep, fatiguing you earlier than somebody with shorter arms, and it all adds up and makes a difference. So that is one instance there as well. The other thing that we want to look at too is muscle insertion points. So for me, I tend to have more of the distance or endurance athlete sort of body structure. I actually have a relatively long torso, so my torso, or not torso, but short torso and very long legs, which makes it more ideal for distance running. The other thing is, how long are your muscles, right? Do you have long muscles or do you have short muscles? And what I mean by this is, where do they insert on, like with the tendon, right? So if you bend your arm, if I took my shirt off here, if you bend your arm, or bend your elbow 90 degrees, and then put your fingers in between here. I could fit at least 3 fingers in between where my bicep starts and my elbow joint. Now, if you can fit 2 or more fingers in that gap, it's considered that you have short muscles. And short muscles are advantageous, again, for endurance. The mechanical advantage created through that arrangement there makes it so that you can produce low amounts of force for a very long period of time. So it's conducive to being able to do more work over longer periods of time rather than a lot of work in a very short period of time. Okay? So somebody who has the longer muscle insertion is going to be somebody who is also going to be able to build a lot more muscle, also be able to exert more force as well. And so being somebody that gears more towards endurance athletics and stuff, that can also play a role into your ability to do pull-ups. Now, I'm not saying that my body setup is one of the primary reasons that I wasn't able to get my goal of getting 20 pull-ups in that 6-week period. As I said before, it had much more to do with my starting fitness level was not adequate, and so the amount of volume of training going into that was much higher than it should have been, and I wasn't prepared for that level of training. That's why this is going to be a longer term goal for me should I decide to continue pursuing it, and whether or not I do decide to seriously continue pursuing this is going to be related to something that I'm going to be talking about later on in this video. But the other reason why was also that my diet was not necessarily appropriate for a high volume calisthenics training routine. Okay, so the last component of the video we're going to be talking about actually the worst part of the experience of trying to do 20 consecutive pull-ups in a row. And many of us get, when we get into fitness, we have particular goals that trump all other goals, things that are more important to us than other things. And so you'll have some guys who'll be like, I want to hit a certain number in my bench press, or I want to hit a certain number in my squat or my deadlift, or all three you want to bring up, right? Which would be more ideal, right? Or you're like, I want to run this certain race at a certain time, right? Or I want to do like these calisthenics tricks, right? I want to be able to do 20 pull-ups in a row. I want to be able to do a muscle up. I want to be able to do the human flag or something like that, right? And there's nothing wrong with these goals. However, at the onset of my comeback into training, which was like 17 years ago, after I had lost 30 pounds of muscle mass due to digestive health issues and everything, that experience had taught me the importance of beginning the right way. And so when I started my bodybuilding again, I was very concerned with making sure that I trained my whole body evenly and brought everything up evenly, okay? And so that actually helped me to avoid a lot of problems along the way, and it actually helped me to build a relatively balanced physique. Now, more recently, with more time constraints placed on my time, I've tried to, sometimes cut a little bit of corners. Sometimes I pretty much stick to just compound movements, and I don't do as much of the other accessory stuff as I used to do, although I still do it. Now, why I bring this up is the one thing that I noticed that I really didn't like when I was doing all those pull-ups is that my shoulders started to get a little internally rotated. And you might see this very often, actually, even with some very popular fitness influencers, how when they're standing facing you, the backs of their wrists are facing forward at you like that, and the palms of their hands are facing backwards. And it usually has to do with that they're doing like a lot of things like pull-ups, lat pull-downs, maybe they're doing like muscle-up type stuff, and especially doing things like bench presses. So they're really overemphasizing their pressing and their vertical pulling at the expense of things that emphasize external shoulder rotation and horizontal pulling. And so this is what I noticed when I was doing the pull-ups. Now, if you're doing the pull-ups right, you should be depressing your shoulder blades at the beginning to create that solid base of support in your upper back so you're not primarily just pulling with your arms and your lats. With that being said, what I've experienced was that even though I was doing that, it still caused my arms to start rotating inward because I was doing such a high volume of this kind of pulling, which is dominated by your lat muscles, right? And as I've talked about in other videos, functions of the lats is adduction of the arms, internal rotation of the shoulders, and extension of your arms. So that internal rotation piece is what was making it problematic. And so that is another reason why I've decided to back off a little bit on my pull-ups so that I can get back to focusing on a more well-rounded routine. And if I'm going to increase my pull-ups, I need to be increasing other variables within my workout as well. And obviously that's going to take more time, right? More time, more energy. You're going to have to eat more food when you're doing this. And so if you don't necessarily have, you know, hours to train, you know, per day, and that would mean that perhaps I'm doing hours of strength training and not doing any cardiovascular exercise, which I don't like to do. I like to get out and do a walk every single day, go for a run a couple times a week. I just feel the best when I'm getting some cardiovascular exercise in, as opposed to always just doing strength training. And so if I'm going to be increasing my pull-ups, then I also need to be increasing my inverted rows, my barbell rows. I also need to be bringing up the other aspects of my body as well, which also brings me to another point, which I think one of the reasons that I was not able to, that made it a little bit more difficult as well, is my background as more doing endurance stuff. So cycling, running, things like that. And then also doing more squatting and deadlifting. So I have more, if you look at a lot of calisthenics athletes, they don't have much for legs, right? Whereas I would say that my legs are fairly decently developed, especially relative to my arms, okay? And so when I'm doing all this stuff, I've got a lot more weight. The distribution of my weight is much more torso and lower body dominant than many calisthenics athletes that you will see, which will also make it more difficult for you pulling yourself up over the bar. But since my goal is ultimately not to be the best calisthenics athlete I can be, but to be the best, more well-rounded athlete that I can be, and which is what I cover in my hybrid strength training program, which is the strategic blend of 4 key strength training styles. So you have that calisthenics muscular endurance component, right? You're working the whole body, you're building that endurance, you're building that mind-muscle connection, the technique, the metabolic efficiency as well. You have old school bodybuilding is built into there. You have powerlifting, and then you also have speed, power, agility training also built into the program as well. And then the way that it's combined allows you to capitalize on many of the benefits of each of these individual styles of training while also minimizing any sort of interference effect that you might get. Because one of the things that we know is that different styles of training prioritize different energy systems, and the principle of adaptation to imposed demands, right? So it's like our body's going to adapt to the environment that we continually subject it to, right? And so hopefully that environment that you're continually subjecting your body to is not one where you're just sitting on the couch watching movies or whatever, scrolling on your phone. Hopefully you're doing some form of physical activity. But if you're primarily just doing endurance activity, you're going to adapt to that, meaning that if you want to be able to do something repetitively over time, it's going to make you smaller so that your body doesn't have to expend as much energy when it's doing that. And it's going to increase capillary density. All these other things can increase the proportion of fat that you can burn when you are doing the exercise so that you don't run out of fuel. Those different types of things, right? If you're doing bodybuilding style of training, it's going to build up more sarcoplasmic hypertrophy, so more fluid inside of the muscles to help build up that leverage when you're doing the exercises. When you're doing powerlifting training, then you're going to be building up super dense muscle structures, right? You're going to build up, really help your central nervous system to be able to exert a large amount of force in a short period of time, which is very helpful as well. And then speed and agility training further kind of adds to the strength training aspect of things, or the powerlifting aspect of things, in taking that strength that you're building in the powerlifting and now making it so you have the timing and the speed to deliver that strength very, very rapidly. All right, guys, so that's all I've got for you today. My experience with muscle ups. If you have anything else to add in the comments below, if you're a calisthenics athlete, if you trained this way for a period of time, and you have any tips to give me as a novice calisthenics athlete to help bolster my training, feel free to drop those in the comments. I welcome your tips and advice. And if you would like to learn more about hybrid strength style of training, which I believe is the best way to get the best of all worlds of aesthetics, strength, and endurance, and athletic performance all kind of blended into one, and help you to do that in a very short period of time, then go ahead and you can check out my email in the description for this channel. Send me an email and I can give you some more details about that as well, or drop something in the comments and I can reach out to you via your email as well. If you like the video, go ahead and hit the like button. If you'd like to see more content related to workout design, both for athletic performance or building muscle, and then also diet relative to athletic performance, or shedding body fat, building muscle, those kind of things. Or if you'd like to learn how you can prevent getting the common injuries that often pop up along the way in your fitness journey, and how to work around those injuries should you, in the unfortunate event that you should sustain them, then consider subscribing to the channel by hitting the button in the lower right-hand corner of the screen, and we'll see you all next time for more health and fitness information.